Reciban todos un cordial saludo. Mi nombre es Brian González. Este año celebramos los 10 años de la Fundación Cali, una organización hermana que durante una década ha venido trabajando con pasión, compromiso, entrega por los derechos, por el bienestar y por la inclusión de las personas en condiciones de discapacidad en América Latina y en el mundo. Por eso, te quiero invitar a nuestra gran gala de aniversario, porque todo es posible gracias a ti, que has creído en nuestra labor, a quienes han apoyado con amor, tiempo, recursos y todo lo que nos ha acompañado en cada paso de este camino. 10 años no se celebran todos los días. Gracias por ser parte de esta historia. Nos vemos. No faltes.
Saludos queridos amigos del Foro Internacional de Personas con Discapacidad. Soy Leti Estrella saludándoles desde México. Y el día de hoy el motivo de este video es felicitar a Fundación Cali Ayuda por 10 años de existencia, 10 años de trabajo, de esfuerzo y de apoyar a personas con discapacidad para facilitar un poco más sus vidas. Y esto no es nada fácil, no es nada sencillo en un mundo que olvida la inclusión. Sin embargo, es muy admirable este trabajo y yo les envío un abrazo con todo mi cariño. Sigan adelante, por favor, ayuden a más personas, muchos años más, muchos sueños por cumplir.
Hola a todos, quiero enviar un mensaje de agradecimiento a la Fundación Cali Ayuda por sus 10 años de incansable labor social. Un saludo muy especial a su líder Eric Gómez, a quien tuve el honor de conocer en el año 2024 en Bogotá durante su primer Congreso de Emprendedores. Gracias Eric por ese compromiso y amor inmenso con el que impulsas todos tus proyectos, por visibilizar tantas causas sociales acá en Latinoamérica y por creer firmemente en las infinitas capacidades de las personas con discapacidad. Bueno, un recuerdo inolvidable fue bailar en plena Plaza de Bolívar junto a Cali para las redes sociales, un momento muy divertido. Felices 10 años Fundación Cali Ayuda, que sigan viniendo muchísimos años más de alegría, prosperidad y de seguir transformando vidas. Los saluda con cariño Fernando Rodríguez desde Bogotá, Colombia.
If you believe you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, and walk across the water, you're defeated, falling on your knees and looking out for some hope tonight. You try to stand up, but you throw your hands up like you no longer have the strength to fight. Cause you've seen too many sunsets, too many days ending in the darkest night. But on your own, you'll never know, you'll never know. If you believe, you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, walk across the water, the water. Believe, you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, walk across the water. If you believe, they say that all you need is faith, but it's almost like you lost your way. Took a few wrong turns, took a few breaks, falling behind now, looking for grace. Cause you need someone to lift you up, yeah, make right all the things you've done. Cause on your own, you'll never know, you'll never know. If you believe, you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, walk across the water, the water. Believe, you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, walk across the water. If you believe, yeah, you can do anything, you can do anything, you can do anything. If you believe.
Buenas tardes, buenas noches, desde donde nos estén viendo. Hoy tenemos un webinar importante para el futuro de nosotros como pacientes con enfermedad huérfana. Hay una leve o muy posible ayuda con Rarus de que podamos tener la posibilidad de obtener ensayos y muchas ayudas en pro del beneficio de nuestra salud. Es muy importante que todos y todas podamos participar y escuchar de todo lo bueno que nos tienen para traer. ¿Cómo estás, Fernando? ¿Cómo te ha ido?
Hola Brian, hola a todas las personas que se están conectando por Zoom, por YouTube, por Facebook. Creo que también estamos por Instagram, me dirás Brian. Y
Eh,
acá, sí, bueno, creo que sí,
sí.
acompañados de nuestros amigos, de Rarus Health, de Mariela, de Elmira, que hoy la conozco y, mejor dicho, es una super mujer, igual que Mariela, unos super invitados hoy con este webinar. Pues yo no conocía mucho de ensayos clínicos, yo creo que muchas de las personas que tal vez estén por acá tampoco, y esa es la idea que acá por medio de este webinar podamos conocer un poco más. Van a hablarnos también de un proyecto súper lindo que vienen desde este año, si no estoy mal, ahorita Mariela nos dice, de todo este 2025 con Rarus Health, que es el proyecto Reales, en donde también pueden hacerse partícipes. Y bueno, bienvenidos, le damos la bienvenida a Mariela y a Almira. Hola, ¿cómo están?
Hola Brian, Fernando, muchísimas gracias por darnos la oportunidad de presentar este webinar educativo a ustedes junto a su comunidad de Fundación Club Pompe Internacional, también a todas las personas que nos están acompañando desde otras partes de Latinoamérica, porque también aprovechamos de invitar a varios de nuestros usuarios de la plataforma y también a líderes de comunidades de otras partes de Latinoamérica, pacientes adultos y también cuidadores. Así que esperamos que disfruten de esta presentación. Yo ahora voy a empezar a compartir pantalla con lo que tenemos preparado para ustedes.
Y Mariela nos
Ahí
va a
está.
decir de Elmira, que también pues está en inglés, va a hacer la charla en
Ujú.
inglés, para que activen los
Así es.
subtítulos, los que no tengan, y que si de pronto están en redes sociales se puedan unir a Zoom para que tengan subtítulos, o si no, pues de pronto en YouTube o Facebook. Me decías, Mariela, que también hay subtítulos, ¿cierto?
Así es. Bueno, nos pueden estar viendo desde varios canales, así que aprovecho también de comentarles que este webinar va a ser grabado en caso de que no puedan verlo completo o que después quieran corroborar los subtítulos corregidos. Nosotros lo vamos a compartir a través de nuestras redes sociales, pero mientras tanto, si es que están viendo este webinar desde el link de Zoom, Los invito a seguir las instrucciones para aclarar los subtítulos de inglés a español. Elmira Sarafova, la doctora que hoy día va a presentar para nosotros, habla en inglés, así que es por eso que les vamos a pedir que vayan al botón de mostrar subtítulos o de closed captions o CC en la parte de abajo de su Zoom, y así van a poder ver los subtítulos de forma simultánea mientras la doctora Elmira presenta. De todas formas, ella va a hablar en inglés, pero el texto en esta presentación está en español, así que también pueden apoyarse en lo que dicen acá las diapositivas. Y también los invito a ir dejando sus preguntas en el chat si cualquier cosa no queda clara o quieren que reiteremos algo. Yo también voy a estar escuchando y voy a estar disponible también para traducirles cualquier cosa. Les doy las gracias también a Brian González y Fernando Rodríguez por darnos la oportunidad de hacer esta presentación educativa para toda la comunidad de pacientes y cuidadores con enfermedades raras y poco frecuentes de Latinoamérica. Fundación Club Pompi Internacional ha sido muy generosa de prestarnos también sus medios que llevan tanto tiempo dándole tanta dedicación y trabajo, así que muchísimas gracias y em, no sé si quieren agregar algo antes de presentar a
No,
la
yo
doctora.
estoy, mejor dicho, súper animado de escuchar a Almira, súper animado
Ujú.
de esto, porque pues no conocía mucho de ensayos clínicos, entonces qué bueno que pues vamos a estar con una experta, con dos expertas en el tema, entonces estoy, mejor dicho, esperando a llenarme de conocimientos.
Así es, Fernando, lo importante es que nos hablen cosas claras, concretas y que no nos pinten pajaritos en el aire, que sepamos la
Totalmente.
verdad y sabemos que estamos en buenas manos, confiando en Dios.
Genial. Muchas gracias, Brian.
Ah,
Bueno, doctora Elmira, le dejo la palabra para que pueda comenzar su presentación. A ver, un segundo.
Me están diciendo que se escucha el audio entrecortado, no sé si de pronto en redes sociales nos pueden indicar si se escucha bien o no se escucha mal, para nosotros también, poder que todo se escuche súper perfecto. Entonces nos pueden avisar en redes sociales si nos están viendo.
Ujú.
Great, Mariela, many thanks for switching my mic on. Now I can tell. So, buenas tardes a todos y todas, pero creo que mi español es no bueno, por eso voy a hablar en inglés. But if it will be hard for you to understand me, or it will be a little bit not clear, we will ask Mariela help me with regard to translation. But let's start and we will see. And actually, I would like to ask you to consider this not like a lecture or webinar or some speech, but like a discussion, because actually clinical trials and development of new drugs is really very complex and complicated topic to discuss. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, please interrupt me, ask questions, because actually I will try to present this topic of clinical trials from different angles. Since I have PhD in molecular biology and pharmacology, I'm going to tell you about clinical trials from scientific point of view. But also the majority of my professional life I spent in pharmaceutical industry and was responsible for international programs of research and development of absolutely innovative drugs, and I know how pharma industry takes decision about what kind of drugs should be developed, in which geographies we should launch these new drugs. But also, I have two kids and I'm mom, and I know how it's hard for patients and for caregivers to take decisions in their health care area. So I will try to see how clinical trials look like from caregivers or patients' point of view. So let's start. Next slide, please. What we are going to touch today. First of all, I am going to tell you about how clinical trials and in general research and development exist inside of pharmaceutical industry. Who take decisions about what kind of drugs we are going to develop and what kind of diseases we are going to treat. After this, I will tell about specific points with regard to orphan drugs, because unfortunately this is very specific case and it will be very important for you understand all bottlenecks which rare diseases have with regard to research of new drugs to treat them. After this, we will discuss with you how you, patients and caregivers, can influence on what kind of research pharma doing. And finally, I'm going to discuss with you how we in Rarus Health can help you with regard to be more visible, with regard to understanding about clinical trials and your disease. So let's go. Well, next, please. And we are going to start with regard to understanding who is who. Because when we are talking about new drugs, there are many different players, or we call them stakeholders, who are involved in the process of research and development. First of all, of course, this is a pharma. Usually we call them big pharma, or in frame of clinical trials, you can see specific word sponsor. So mainly this is who is paying for everything. And pharma like Johnson & Johnson, like Pfizer, like Novartis, really is a global companies who are having all cycle of research, development, and commercialization of new drugs. But also very important to know that pharma can't work with all types of different drugs. And usually they go to scientific institutes, to academia, to have collaboration with regard to very early stages of development of drugs. So all drugs which we have right now on the market based on academic research which have been done before. Also, usually pharma has a lot of different service providers who help to them to do some researches. If we're talking about clinical studies or clinical researches, usually we are talking about contract research organizations which help pharma to do clinical trials. And together with pharma, they are planning protocols of clinical trials, who will be involved in this, etc., etc. And there are small clinical research organizations and big ones like IQVIA, Paraxel, and others. And it's very important to know that pharma industry is very, very regulated industry. And I think that many of you heard about FDA, Food and Drug Administration, and Anvisa, for example, in Brazil. And this is big regulators who organize and control and approve all new drugs on the markets worldwide. And they supervise all process of research and development and launch of new drugs from the very beginning till the end when drug will be on the market. So pharmaceutical market is really very complex one with regard to connections between all these stakeholders. Let's go. And here I would say very classical scheme of different stages research and development of new drugs. So total cost of new drug is more than $2 billion. And time from the idea, guys, let's do new drug, to launch on the market, in other words, for availability for patients, it can take between 10 and 15 years. So it's very long and very expensive process, which consists of different types of activities. These activities usually can be separated into 3 main stages. Stage number 1, when we are trying to understand mechanism of diseases and different type of compounds or molecules that could improve this pathological process inside of, let's say, different tubes. And we call this in vitro. After we would find new molecule which improve pathological process, we are switching to second stage, which we usually call preclinical studies. And at this stage, we are working with animals and try to understand, does this specific compound, this molecular, really fix problems inside of animals? And for this, we have different types of animal models. So we have mice with diabetes. We have mice with cardiovascular diseases. We have mice with different mutations in genes. And using these animal models, we try to model disease and fix this disease using these new compounds. And last and very important stage of development is clinical trials. And usually we have 3 different stages of clinical trials, but idea of clinical trials is to show that inside of human beings, this new molecule is also active and also safe. And after we finish clinical trials, we go to regulator, for example, FDA, show all results, and FDA give us approval to market this drug. And after this drug start to be available for our patients. So in general, very long process and very costly process. Next, please. And if we have, with regard to preclinical stage, have really good animal models, usually this is mice, rats, or primates. It's actually very important for us because we can test a lot of different compounds using these models and find the best one. Usually, this is part of research and development, which we can see in different academical sources, but also pharma has their own facilities and do such researches inside of the industry. Next, please. With regard to clinical trials, as I mentioned before, in general, we have 3 phases: first, second, and third of clinical trials. In general, clinical trials only can take around 8-10 years, and it's once again a very expensive research. And different stages of clinical trials have different objectives why we're doing them. So phase 1, usually we call this first in human. And this is first in human research. We need this because we have to understand dose of new drug and safety of new drug. Usually, inside of stage 1 of clinical trials, we have healthy volunteers who take part in this research. Not people with disease, but health volunteers, with just 2 exemptions. If we are talking about new oncological drugs in phase 1 of clinical trials, we can include people with oncology. And also, if we are talking about genetic diseases, in phase 1 of clinical trials, we also allowed to include people with genetic mutations. In other cases, like cardiovascular diseases, like diseases of gastroenterology group, all such diseases with regard to clinical trials of phase 1 go with healthy volunteers. If we show that we have understanding of right dosing, and this is not toxic for people, we switch to the second part of clinical trials. And second stage of clinical trials going to show that people with disease treated with this new drug can be treated, can be safely treated, and we can measure outcomes of this treatment. Usually, this is very important phase of clinical trials because in phase 2, we have to demonstrate that our drug is really a drug which help people. And if we show this and this drug is efficient one, we switch to the third stage of clinical trials when we include more people to show that our drug is efficient and safe on the big population of people. And people with some comorbidities like cardiovascular diseases, like some maybe depressions or other stages also can be treated with this drug. And after phase 3 of clinical trials, we can go to FDA, get license for this drug, and actually sell this drug. But even after we started sales, we don't finish our research because phase 4 of research is dedicated to observational studies. So we are treating patients, but we are still very concentrating on outcomes of such treatment. And if something is going wrong, we have to report to FDA that something went wrong. Next. And the main document which we have inside of clinical trial, this is protocol of clinical trials. They are absolutely different for phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. But this protocol, it's really a big document. Usually it consists of more than 200 pages. And this protocol describes very detailed all actions which we are going to have inside of clinical trials. And this is points with regard to patients we are going to include in clinical trials. This is about clinics that we are going to involve in clinical trials. This is about criteria which we are going to use inside of clinical trials to be able to judge, is it efficient treatment or not? Is it safe treatment or not? And this protocol usually discussed with different part of community. First of all, protocol prepared by pharma. But also pharma elaborates this protocol together with contract research organizations. Also, together they go to FDA and show these protocols. And before starting any clinical trial, FDA should approve this protocol, mainly saying, guys, I believe that this is the best way of researching of this new drug for this population of patients. And also, this protocol elaborated together with scientists because they need to be involved with regard to understanding what is science-based behind of this research. And I have to say that unfortunately, up to last years, the only stakeholder which is very important in pharma, but actually this is caregivers and patients, and this is the only stakeholder that have never been involved in discussion of protocol of clinical trials. And we will touch this point later. This is a big disadvantage which have been discovered recently, and now rules of this game is changing, but very, very slowly. Next, please. So here, another document which you have to know, and this is informed consent. Informed consent, this is the most important document inside of protocol for patients and caregivers. Because before you will be included in clinical trial, you have to read this informed consent together with your doctor. And this informed consent, this is like a short paper where everything what will be with you inside of clinical trials is describing in details. What is your obligations? What is your responsibility? What doctors inside of clinical trials going to do with you? Do you have some payments for take part in these clinical trials? Maybe not direct, maybe indirect. What will be your rights as a patient inside of these clinical trials? And please keep in mind that usually this informed consent use very bureaucratic language and very medical language, and it's not so understandable for patients. And please ask questions, because this document is really very important for you and all your rights listed there. So if you are reading this document and don't understand what people is talking about, please ask your doctor to explain you in simple language. It's your right, but also your obligation to understand everything there. Next, please. And if we are talking about clinical trials in general, the only person who is taking decision about taking part or not taking part in clinical trials, it's you, patient, or you, caregiver. And actually, there are many pros and cons which you have to think while taking decision about clinical trials. Here, I try to list main points which you should think when your doctor tell you, by the way, I would like to tell you that you can be enrolled in this clinical trial. So here, all benefits and all contradictions which you should think about before taking any decision about clinical trials. And also separately in last column, I put questions which you have to ask your doctor. I have to say that I see difference between medical system here in Latam and, for example, in Europe. In Europe, I saw more partnership approach in communication between doctors and patients. And it's absolutely okay for patients in Europe to ask questions, to say that I don't understand something, please explain me. And to try to find second opinion if patients feel that doctor tells something which is not consistent for him. Here in Latin America, I see that the main communication style between doctors and patients is paternalistic. I'm doctor. I know better than you. Actually, from my point of view, it's not a productive way of communication. And you, like patients and like caregivers, have your own rights to understand everything before taking decision. And please ask questions. Ask questions. And once again, ask questions. And if you don't understand something, please don't hesitate to engage your doctor in discussion to be able to take really informed decision. Not just, okay, I will agree, we will see later. No, it's really something to think about. Next, please. How you can find clinical trials? Actually, here I put screenshot of the main platform with clinical trials worldwide, clinicaltrials.gov. And this platform collects all clinical trials which we have worldwide right now. So I went to this platform yesterday and put Pompe disease. And as you can see right now, we have 38 clinical researches dedicated to Pompe. So you can put other name of other disease and also see the list of different clinical trials which is going on. Next, please. And this is some kind theoretical knowledge about clinical trials, about research and development, but let's switch to more practical questions. Who takes decision about what drugs we are developing and for what kind of diseases? Next, please. And here I would step in the shoes of pharma companies and tell you a little bit more how pharma, being a business, first of all, thinking about their activities in researching of new drugs. Remember that being a pharma, it's being a business, and I'm thinking about business and have to take decision based on data. What kind of data I need to have just to take my decision about drugs. First of all, is this a really big problem? How many people have this type of disease? Is there any geographical difference in these diseases? For example, some ethnicities has more disease than other ethnicities, or it's just consistent between different geographies. What is the cause of this disease? What is the reason behind of this disease? Do we understand pathology? Do we know patient journey? In other words, where are these patients? Where do they live? What kind of problems do they have? What first symptoms do they have? What is the standard of care right now for this disease? Is this really big problem with regard to number of patients or with regard to existing therapies? And if we are talking about genetic diseases, do we know something about gene or mutation which is responsible for this disease? So numbers, 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 and once again, numbers. I need data to be able to take data-based decision. And if I don't have data about mechanism of this pathology, about number of patients, about standard treatment for this pathology right now, it will be very hard for me to go to my management and tell, guys, I have so wonderful idea to innovate some new drug for this specific disease. I need to show with figures that it will be interesting disease with regard to money and with regard to business. Next slide, please. Earphones. And having all this knowledge, let's speak about rare diseases. Next, please. Well, usually when we are talking about drugs for treatment of rare diseases, we talking about orphan drugs. This is a specific term which we use for all drugs that treat rare diseases. And here we have some problem, let's say, because definition of rare diseases are different across different regions. In the United States, we have one type of definition of rare diseases. In the European Union, we have another type of definition. And here in Latin America, we have really patchwork of definitions about rare diseases. Recently, in Chile, we didn't have even definition of rare diseases. And I know this situation, it's not rare, unfortunately, for other countries in our region. But mainly orphan drugs, which are treating less than 2,500 persons in population. So this is what we are talking about when we are talking about orphan diseases and orphan drugs. Next one. And here, maybe you remember a scheme which I showed you earlier. And here, pretty much the same scheme of R&D research of new drugs, R&D process of new drugs, but specifically for orphan drugs. And here, I put stop at every stage, which is much complex for rare diseases than for, let's say, big diseases like cardiovascular one. First of all, we don't know many things about disease itself. So it's very hard to understand pathological mechanism behind all symptoms and behind all mutations which we have. Second, if you remember, we had conversation about preclinical models when we use animal models to understand disease and to model disease. Actually, in rare diseases, we have a few animal models, and this is a big gap which actually don't give us opportunity to test many drugs because we don't have models to do this. With regard to clinical trials, well, it's very hard to find patients to take part in these clinical trials. And also, it's hard to have good statistics behind these clinical trials. Because when we are talking about classical clinical trials, we are talking about thousands of people at the last stage of trial. Here, we are talking about 20, 50 patients. And it's very challenging to show real statistics using these small numbers. And of course, it gives us much more money which was spending on R&D and very long, even longer cycle of development if we're talking about medicamentos orphans. Next. And of course, it's very important to understand what is going on with regard to clinical trials here in Latin America. And actually, when I have been preparing slides and put this slide, Mariela asked me, Elmira, are you going to work on this slide? Why I see just title here? And I told, unfortunately, Mariela, it's not a title. This is how pharma see our region. And pharma see our region as a big hole without any information. So I had many conversations with pharma sitting in United States, in Europe. And when I asked them, what do you know about Latin America? The only question I got, nothing. 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 They don't know about clinical centers. They don't know about number of patients. They don't know about patient journey. They don't know, does a doctor in clinical center speak English and can discuss protocol with them, for example. So, nothing. And if you recall how pharma take decision, should they develop new drug, they always rely on data. So here we don't have data. And the only decision they are taking, they don't see our region. So there is no any activities in our region because our region don't have data. Next, please. And also they understand another big problems which our region has. And this slide is showing when our countries approve drugs after FDA approval. So, for example, if we are talking about Mexico, you see that FDA, for example, approved drug here, and only after 859 days, Mexican government also approved this drug. And next figure on this slide show that after approval, another 1,215 days should pass in order patients get access to the drug. Because after approval, pharma should negotiate with government with regard to cost of drug, availability of drug, reimbursement of drug, and approval of drug inside of the country don't guarantee that patients will have access to this drug. So coming back to pharma and coming back to how pharma thinks, okay, I have big delay in approval of my drug in Latin America. So also I don't know anything about number of patients in Latin America. Why I should invest in clinical trials in Latin America? I don't understand. Go to the next slide. Well, I wouldn't say this is a very good picture. How we can change situation together with you. Next slide, please. Let me start this part with two stories. It's real stories which happened a couple of years ago. And first story, this is a story about a clinical trial in rare disease, Duchenne myodystrophy. And this is a story about Astellas company who spent thousands of millions of dollars to bring new drug to treat DMD to phase 2 of clinical trials. And they didn't manage to find enough patients who would like to take part in this clinical trial. And they stopped development of this drug. And it was huge consequences for this company with regard to their cost of shares, with regard to their financial stability, etc., etc. But why they didn't find patients for clinical trials? Because their protocol of clinical trial was so weird, so bad for families that nobody wanted to take part in this clinical trial. A lot of different infusions, a lot of traveling between different sites, a lot of analysis, huge burning things for family, and nobody wanted to take part because it was really inconvenient for family. Next part. Second example, also Duchenne myodystrophy. Actually, as I told you, usually protocol for clinical trials is developing based on science, based on what doctor says, and based on understanding of pharma company what is going on in real life. Understanding, but not knowledge. And here it was very interesting case when outcomes of treatment should be considered differently based on patient's input. For example, in Duchenne, in all protocols of clinical trials, we measure so-called 6 minutes walking test. And doctor with a timer is sitting and just measuring how far boy with Duchenne myodystrophy go through these 6 minutes. And frankly speaking, it's absolutely not useful for patients because they are not caring about speed with which they are working. But for them is really crucial to be able to use their hands. And it's about quality of their life, but nobody measures this because doctor's point of view about patients and reality of patients are absolutely different. Next, please. And this is just 2 examples, and I know much more. And a couple of years ago, FDA decided that not involving of patients in development of protocols of clinical trials and in general research and development of new drugs is very bad practice, which should be changed. And this is really a breakthrough in R&D of new drugs when FDA started to talk about patient-focused drug development. And it means that pharmaceutical industry have to involve patients and caregivers in planning of clinical trials, in discussion, and in measurement of outcomes as early as possible. And I would say this is a huge initiative which give us patients, caregivers, researchers, great tool to influence what is going on in this area. Next, please. And how you can do this. First of all, please take part in all registries of your disease because it gives us researchers and pharma more data. We understand your disease better. We understand your numbers better, and we can take data-based decisions. Please keep your medical data because it's invaluable source of information about disease. It's about real clinical practice. It's about your medical reality. And if we can use these documents, we can anonymously extract data and use it to plan clinical trials and to bring more drugs to treat your disease. And of course, having all this information, consider participation in clinical trials, but remember that you need to think about pluses and minuses before taking any decision. Next one. How we can help you? First of all, if we're starting with patients, we help families to keep and save their medical data and their personal disease history. Because as I told, in anonymized way, it's really huge amount of insights for researchers. And these insights give us more information about disease, more understanding your needs and your problems. And if we're thinking about how it can be useful for you in your daily lives, actually it's help you to tell doctors about your medical history, about your personal story faster. Because based on your big medical history, we prepare small narrative, small story, but which cover all problems which you have. Next, please. Also, we have care managers who help you to understand what is going on. And I'm talking not about medical part of your problems, not about symptoms, because for us, it's not disease, it's just life with disease, including education, including psychological problem, including your family, including your economical situation. And we try together with you prepare guide for you and action steps for you in order to find the best way what to do and spend less money on doctors. From my point of view, this is very valuable service for newly diagnosed families who lost, who don't understand what to expect, and who are really in big stress after they got their diagnosis. Next, please. And if we are talking about your patient community, first of all, we help you to be more visible. I don't like slide which is empty with regard to understanding of pharma about Latin America. It's not the best situation. We have to change this. And we would like to help you to be visible by pharma. And here, of course, we help you to collect and process data. Here, we can work together with you and have playbooks for your community members, which help understand the landscape of all different things which is going on in pharmaceutical industry, including clinical trials. And we help you to go to pharma and say, guys, we are here. This is our numbers. This is our problems. This is real data behind of us. This is why, and this is next slide, please. We organized this project Realis, which help you to collect all data about your patient community and start to be more visible and start to understand what is going on, how many of community members you have, with what kind of problems, what is important for you, and you can talk same language with industry, with contract research organization, and also with your government, because government also needs data to take data-based decisions. So this is what I would like to discuss with you. This is really not easy to eat information, but I try to explain this in plain language, and if you have questions, I will be happy to answer. Many thanks.
Muchísimas gracias a la doctora Elmira por esta presentación. Sabemos que muchas veces los subtítulos se confunden, así que si es que en algún punto se perdieron y no supieron qué estábamos hablando, por favor déjenos sus preguntas. Ahora vamos a pasar a la parte de respuestas y me contaba Fernando que tenemos un par de preguntas, ¿no?
Sí, Gabriela nos va a leer el chat
Ujú.
de Zoom. Por ahí estás, Gabriela.
Sí, aquí estoy. ¿Me escuchan?
Sí, te escuchamos, Gabriela,
Sí.
¿cómo estás?
Bien, muchísimas gracias. Buenas tardes a todos. Bueno, voy a leer las preguntas. Entonces, la primera dice, what specifically did families find inconvenient about the clinical trial for Duchenne? Que en español sería como en cuanto a los ensayos clínicos para la distrofia muscular de Duchenne, que encontraron las familias específicamente inconveniente. Esa sería la primera pregunta.
Mhm. Very interesting question. Actually, um, one of the biggest problem inside of clinical trials for rare diseases is that you have to visit clinics which do clinical trials a lot. Imagine that you live your standard life and now your kid is a part of clinical trial. And in protocol of clinical trial, you have to visit clinics and have some checkups twice per week. It means that you have to travel because if you are living in one part of country and a clinical site can be, and it happens in other part of country, it's not possible to travel there twice per week. So you should think about moving closer to this clinical trial center while you will be inside of this clinical trial. So what is going on with your job? What is going on with your husband this time? What is going on with other kids if you have these kids? So heavy traveling points was one of the main obstacles for families there because protocol was prepared based on these very frequent visits to clinic. It was main obstacle.
Thanks. Gabriela, la segunda, ¿cuál sería? Bueno, todavía hay más, hay dos más.
Listo. Entonces, la segunda en español dice, soy paciente con Charcot-Marie Tooth tipo 2A 2A. Según leí en unas investigaciones, en el futuro tendrán en cuenta a la población latinoamericana para pruebas. ¿Alguna información sobre los ensayos clínicos para el CMT? Gracias. En inglés sería, I'm a patient with Charcot-Marie Tooth type 2A 2A. According to what I read in some research, in the future, they will take into account the Latin American population for any tests. Is there any information about clinical trials for CMT? Thank you.
Thank you for this question. As far as I remember, right now we have around 450,000 clinical trials worldwide. So actually, I don't know. To understand this and to give you an answer, I have to go to clinicaltrials.gov and double check what is going on. Because actually, based on my small research, we have plenty of different clinical trials, not specifically for Charcot-Marie-Tooth, but with regard to Latin America, with involvement of two main geographies, Mexico and Brazil. So I don't know how many trials we have right now. I can go double check and answer you later, maybe in email or in WhatsApp. We'll be happy to do this. But if you are living in these two countries, probability to be included in any clinical trials are much higher than you live in Chile. Unfortunately, this is true.
Okay, thank you for that. La siguiente pregunta sería como ¿Los pacientes y sus cuidadores participaron en el diseño de la investigación? Me refiero específicamente para su patología, sería la primera pregunta. The translation to that will be patients and their...
Gabriela, I understand. Please don't spend your time. I understand. Many thanks for translation, but I understand.
Got
Gracias,
you.
Gabriela.
I'm sorry.
No. Many thanks for helping me. So, actually, there are different methodologies, and I would say very legacy ones, which pharma usually use right now to talk to patients. First, according to pharmaceutical standards, pharma cannot contact patients directly. And this is a big problem for them. And this is a big bottleneck, actually. So they use different marketing agencies to do this. And this is very bad approach, I have to say, because marketing agencies don't understand about disease at all. And one of the big idea behind of Rarus was to create platform that can help patients to deliver their voices to pharma in legal and compliant way. So inside of our platform, as I told, we collect not only medical information, but also things which are very important for people in their simple daily life. And we analyze this information and share this anonymized insight with pharma. And this is how we help pharma to understand you better. And all our questionnaires inside of platform based on my experience of working in pharma and with pharma, based on our interview with clinical research organizations, with people who help in FDA, with pharma, and we try to collect information which is really helpful for industry to plan not something in vacuum, but plan according your reality and your needs.
Gabriela, antes de pasar a la otra pregunta que estaban acá, a mí me llegó una por interno, precisamente sobre el tema de reclutamientos. Mira, me decían que ¿cómo son? Espérame. Los reclutamientos, ¿cómo se dan cuando son enfermedades ultra huérfanas y los pacientes son pocos?
Yes, very good question. Actually, ultra rare diseases is a big problem. I wouldn't say this is okay or we have some perspective, but how it works in reality. When you have ultra rare disease, it's extremely important to find international registry of such patients. If you don't know how to do this, please contact us, we will help. But you need to be calculated. And when pharma would start something, first place which they would visit to understand situation would be such international registries. And if they would decide based on your pathology, I will explain a little bit later what does it mean. Based on your pathology, that they are going to have clinical trials and to research new drug for your pathology. Usually in ultra rare diseases, they open 2 or 3 clinical sites worldwide. And they can spend some money to bring you closer to this clinical site, because they understand that it will be much cheaper for them to spend money on your travels and on your living close to clinical site than just open new clinic and new clinical site near you. So usually they go to you and tell, we have this clinical trial and we can reimburse all your expenses with regard to traveling and living near site, and it could be even 1 year or even more based on protocol when they will cover your expenses. Of course, it's not a general practice, but it could be. Coming back to how pharma taking decision about developing drug for ultra-rare diseases. Big plus if you have monogenetic disease. It means that you have one gene with one clear mutation. And in this case, pharma like your disease more because it's clear what kind of gene and what kind of mutation have to be fixed. And based on last achievements of science with regard to all these CRISPR-Cas, new virus vectors which can deliver good gene to your cells, probability of having drug for treatment of these monogenetic diseases is much higher when you have different mutations in different genes. The reality of science and industry is it.
Thanks, Elmira. Bueno, por tiempo, Gabriela nos va a colaborar con unas dos últimas preguntas y ya terminaríamos con Mariela, que nos tiene también una invitación para el tema de reales. Entonces, Gabriela, ¿estás por ahí?
Sí, señor.
Se me dice
Listo.
señor y me hace sentir más viejo, pero bueno.
Bueno. Bueno, la siguiente pregunta es, ¿en los ensayos clínicos personalizados se están considerando las variables farmacogenéticas de los pacientes?
Well, yes, it's possible. In rare diseases, FDA right now discuss approach which they call N equal 1. It means that FDA is open to discuss possibility of having clinical trial when the number of patients is 1. It was impossible even 2 or 3 years ago, but right now, when we have huge progress in our genetic and science in general, it's possible. But I would have to say that it's still quite rare case. So theoretically, yes, it's possible. Practically, it's still more about, unfortunately, newspapers than real practice of doing clinical trials. But I see how this landscape is changing and changing very fast. So it could be that in 2 years it will be our reality.
Thanks, Elmira.
Sí.
Gaby.
Sí, tenemos la última pregunta que sería, ¿cómo las organizaciones de Latinoamérica pueden ser socios activos en estos estudios?
It's always about networking and partnership. I would really recommend you to start visiting scientific conferences, at least to read news about conferences in this area, because usually people who attend such conferences are very active. And I'm talking about all kinds of people. I'm talking about scientists. I'm talking about clinicians and healthcare professionals, because actually it should be some volume of people in the region which give us possibility to do research at good level with good data, etc., etc. This is with regard to landscape. If we are talking about contract research organizations who are responsible for clinical trials, well, I have been in World Orphan Drug Congress in April in Boston, when all stakeholders of rare disease area discussed their problems and presented their achievements. I have to say that even big companies like IQVIA, like Paraxel, still not presented in the region. We have a number of local clinical research organizations, but there are a few of them. And anyway, reality is that pharma invests in all this. And I would formulate that our main, yours and ours, goal is to make our region visible for pharma. To do this, we really need to understand how many of us here, in which geographies, with what kind of problems. So numbers, numbers, and numbers again. And well, when pharma will see this demand, they will follow their patients. They will be here. So this is not just point of having such organizations here, not having. This is point of critical mass around these clinical trials, around legislation, around patient advocacy groups, around very active healthcare professionals. So I think that the more steps we will take, the better will be results, and the sooner will be results, which is very important in case of if you have kids with rare diseases or adults with rare diseases. Time plays huge role.
Interesante lo que nos dice. Mira, entre más datos tendremos mejores resultados. Ojo a eso.
Sí, bueno, también obviamente les agradecemos a las personas que nos han estado acompañando en redes sociales, en Facebook, en YouTube, en todas las redes de donde estamos transmitiendo en vivo. Y bueno, queremos dejar ya para terminar a Mariela, que nos va a dar una información súper importante también y un cierre a este gran webinar. Las preguntas que quedaron acá en el tintero, pues las vamos a responder. Nos pueden escribir ahí su correo electrónico y las estaremos respondiendo. Mariela.
Así es, muchas gracias Fernando, Brian. Como decían, todo lo que revisamos hoy día en esta presentación es muy relevante para las personas que viven con enfermedades raras y poco frecuentes. Creo que en Latinoamérica se sabe muy poco acerca de ensayos clínicos precisamente porque no ha habido disponibilidad. Y para que haya esta disponibilidad, tenemos que empezar a solicitarlo, tenemos que empezar a organizarnos y seguir haciendo estas alianzas como la que tenemos con Fundación Pompe Club Internacional, en donde expertos en ensayos clínicos y en registro de pacientes como nosotros, Rarus Health, y las comunidades de pacientes nos organizamos para hacernos visibles, para que las farmacéuticas empiecen a tomarnos en cuenta y no solamente desde países aislados, ¿cierto? Porque entendemos que México y Brasil tienen mucha más visibilidad que los otros países simplemente por números, pero si los otros países más pequeños queremos ser relevantes, vamos a tener que unirnos. No se puede ser solamente desde Colombia o desde Chile, así que creo que ya es un paso súper significativo y muy importante el que estamos tomando aquí, de empezar a organizarnos a través de las fronteras para tener la información precisa que es necesaria para el desarrollo de nuevos tratamientos. Y en este caso, el proyecto Reales es un registro de pacientes que nosotros diseñamos en Rarus Health, en específico para enfermedades neuromusculares, o sea, como el síndrome de Duchenne, como la condición de Pompe, como el Charcot-Marie-Tooth. Todos pueden participar en este registro de forma gratuita, ya seas cuidador o paciente. Lo único que tienes que hacer es ir a nuestro sitio, rarus.health. Ahí puedes entrar a nuestro centro digital de cuidados, comenzar con tu registro y desde ahí también se te va a invitar a participar en el proyecto Reales. Como les dije, esto es gratuito y va a estar disponible durante todo el año 2025. Esperamos también que hayan disfrutado de la información que compartimos hoy día y también los invitamos a dejarnos sus comentarios, sus preguntas en nuestras redes sociales o a través de nuestros canales como WhatsApp o email. Nosotras felices de seguir la conversación ahí, de responder todas sus preguntas. Y bueno, también por último, muchísimas gracias a todas las personas que estuvieron conectadas con nosotros aquí desde Zoom. No se preocupen si en algún subtítulo se perdieron, porque vamos a subir la grabación a nuestros canales con los subtítulos correctos, así lo pueden volver a ver cuando quieran.
Muchísimas gracias, Mariela. Muchísimas gracias, Elmira, por darnos este espacio a nuestra comunidad, a todas las personas que nos están acompañando. De verdad, yo despejé muchísimas dudas sobre el tema de los ensayos clínicos. Hasta estuve mirando la página web que Elmira nos dejó ahí de los ensayos clínicos que están en este momento. Y pues veo que claramente en Latinoamérica hay muy pocos. En el momento hay muy pocos.
Sí,
Entonces, la idea es que esos estudios sean mucho más, pero pues para eso necesitamos participación de todos, de toda la
sí, vamos a tener que
comunidad.
salir a buscar esos estudios.
Exactamente. Entonces, Brian, ¿qué tienes para terminar? Y pues darles, obviamente, las gracias a toda la comunidad que se conectó.
Así es, muchas gracias a todos y a todas por estar presentes el día de hoy. Una charla muy provechosa con ayuda de la tecnología y de excelentes ponentes como lo son Mira y Mariela por esta interesante charla. Yo creo que los ensayos clínicos es algo muy importante que debemos tener en cuenta y nos podría cambiar la vida. Entonces, recuerden lo que dijo Elmira. Entre más datos, mejores resultados. Y tienen que tener en cuenta que Brasil y otros países están más avanzados. ¿Por qué? Porque tienen más datos. Así que cordialmente invitados a que se inscriban y pongan su granito de arena. No sé si es más, Fernando. Yo creo que nos
¿No?
despedimos.
Pueden también seguir a Rarus en redes. No sé si Mariela nos puede dejar las redes de Rarus para que también lo sigan, sigan todo lo que es
Ujú.
los live que ellos hacen constantemente. También que nos sigan a nosotros, @clubpompe.
Sí,
Así es, nos pueden buscar en todas las redes sociales como Rarus Health. Ahí nosotros felices de empezar a conectarnos.
Muchísimas
bueno,
gracias. Elmira,
Muchas
no hablo
gracias.
mucho inglés. Muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you very much. Y gracias a todos. Feliz fin de semana.
feliz fin de
Muchísimas
semana.
gracias a todos.
Gracias,
¿Algo para
chao.
decir, Elvira? ¿Usted tiene algo para decir?
En español, please. Practice, practice Spanish.
La idea de enfermedades raras y pocos frecuentes es internacional, en inglés, en español, en ruso. Toda la gente quiere medicamentos y por eso vamos a empezar a organizar nuestros datos. Sí.
Excelente.
Thanks.
Genial.
Bye.
Gracias, gracias, muy amables. Gracias a todos. Bye.
Chao,
Fernando,
muchas
la
gracias.
foto.
If you believe you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, and walk across the water, the water. You feel defeated, falling on your knees and looking out for some hope tonight. You try to stand up, but you throw your hands up like you no longer have the strength to fight. Cause you've seen too many sunsets, too many days ending in the darkest night. But on your own, you'll never know, you'll never know. If you believe you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, walk across the water, the water. Believe you can move the highest mountains, cross the greatest oceans, walk across the water. If you believe. They say that all you need is faith, but it's almost like you lost your way. Took a few wrong turns, took a few breaks, falling behind now, looking for grace. Cause you need someone to lift you up, yeah, make right all the things you've done. Cause on your own, you'll